All right, welcome. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for agreeing to serve on the School System Personnel Subcommittee. I'm Janice Fox. I'm Core Director for the Middle Tennessee Grand Region. Um, our Grand Region in Middle Tennessee serves Upper Cumberland, South Central, and Mid Cumberland. And I'm happy to be supporting you and our subcommittee chair, Director Starnes. So I'm going to be supporting facilitation and assisting the chair, so he'll be hands-free to engage and support your conversations as we move forward and shaping the future of our state. So please call on me as needed. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Bear with me a second. I'm in a new location today, so can you give me a thumbs up if you see the presentation slide one? Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, we will if I will move to this next slide before handing it over to our chair. But we'll begin each meeting with reading the statement to help us focus on a future state of funding in Tennessee. The Tennessee Department of Education is excited to work with you on this opportunity to discuss the state's formula for funding public education. So conversations, I'll just bear with me and I'll read the slides. Conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in a new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in a new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant of the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula. So I wanted to read through that. Thank you. And Chairman, I will kick it on over to you. We've got the agenda, and then we'll move into introductions. So I will go on mute and just call on me as needed.
Dr. Fox, thank you very much for that. Welcome, everyone. I want to thank you, first of all, for your willingness to serve and what you'll bring to this. So if we could, we'll jump right into introductions. And if you'll tell us your name, the organization or community you represent, one thing you're looking forward to, and what you hope to contribute to the process and conversation. So just kind of looking at my windows here. Nick, if you'll start us off, please.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick Darnell. My day job is an assistant principal, middle school. This is my 16th year in middle school education. I was a teacher for 13 years and now have been an assistant AP for 3 years. I work in Hamlin County, Westview Middle, and the thing that I look forward to, I think this is a worthy conversation that's overdue. So I'm glad we're having this important conversation, and I hope to contribute to the process and the conversation just from a building level perspective, and someone who has devoted their entire career to education and loves kids. So.
Nick, you want to tell us your side job as well?
Sorry, Steve. So the side job that I have, I am the board member for the 1st Congressional District. And I, of course, it's required that one of the board members be an educator, and that's me. So.
Thank you, Nick. want to brag on Nick. He does a great job representing us, and having that perspective of an educator is very important. So again, thank you, Nick. Kathy?
Hi, I'm Kathy Beck. I'm the Director of Schools in Cheatham County. Certainly one thing I'm looking forward to is just the opportunity to share and collaborate with you to make decisions or recommendations on pieces that will make a difference for kids in Tennessee. It's very exciting work. One thing that I think I can contribute is my many years of work in rural schools. My dissertation was on a rural school district, and then I've only worked in rural school districts, and so I think I will have that lens to be able to help out to represent that particular group. So excited to get to know everyone and to work with everyone to make some great recommendations for kids.
Thank you, Kathy. Bo?
Hi, everybody. My name is Bo Griffin. I'm the Director of Schools for Millington Municipal Schools. What I'm excited about is this all us as educators coming together to try to find the most effective way that we can support our students and in each of our individual situations. I think the one thing I can bring to the table is that I'm a very unique perspective being in Shelby County with having one of the largest school systems, but we also have several private, charter, and also 6 municipalities as well to bring a little different perspective. Even though I'm in a major county, I'm still a rural school district, and being able to bring that in perspective, I hope I can just be a part of this great team and make a difference. So thank you.
Thanks, Bo. Clint?
Good afternoon. I'm Clint Satterfield. I'm the director in Trousdale County. I have served in this position for a dozen of years, and I'm looking forward to being a part of the process and working with all of you guys and gals. And I'm interested in learning more about a student-based funding formula. I don't have a lot of background knowledge on that. I've been trying to catch up and read, what I can. I think I can contribute. I'm also a rural school district. We have 2 traffic lights in Trousdale County. We don't have a lot of physical capacity, and I'm concerned about how the local funding piece fits into this. And if I have any expertise at all, I wrote my dissertation as well on strategic compensation. I think we have one of the most robust strategic compensation plans in Tennessee. And if that topic ever comes up, I could probably contribute in that area.
Thank you, Clint. Bruce?
Hey, thanks, Steve, and good afternoon, everyone. Bruce Borchers, Oak Ridge Schools Superintendent. And like everybody, I look forward to learning from everybody, learning more about the funding formula and the possibilities that we could have moving forward. And what I can contribute, I think that might be of some help, is I've been in 4 different states with 4 different funding models. So I've seen a little bit of all, so I'll be able to contribute some of that.
Thank you. Dr. Watson?
Good afternoon. I'm Tara Watson. I'm with Cheatham County School Districts with Dr. Kathy Beck. One thing I look forward to is, as much of you have said, is learning more and gaining a new perspective. What I think I could contribute to the conversation is I am currently the Chief Operations and Finance Officer, but I am a teacher and I've been a principal and I was the Chief Academic Officer. So now I've been on both sides.
Okay. And Ms. Warley?
Kim Warley, Director of Schools for Dyersburg City Schools. I'm in my 2nd year, so I'm fairly new to this role. But I'm looking forward to learning more about how we can improve education for all the students in Tennessee. In Dyersburg, we have a very diverse student population. So as we improve funding for all the students in Tennessee, I want to make sure that all students across Tennessee and all those subgroups are represented and how we can improve education for all of those subgroups.
Thank you. See Jennifer Van Dyke on my screen.
I apologize. I was on mute and I was having a hard time finding it. So I'm Jennifer Van Dyke. I am also with Oak Ridge Schools and new to this portion of it. So I'm really just looking forward to learning more about the current process and, and hoping that I can learn more about the new process.
What's your position, Jennifer?
Well, I'm in transition. Starting January 1st, I will be the interim finance director. So I'm brand new. I'm currently in the accounting office. So.
All right, thank you. And let's see here. Dr. Townes.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I am Nakia Townes. I'm the interim superintendent in Hamilton County Schools. The part that I'm looking forward to is I think this is an interesting conversation about funding in Tennessee, and I am hopeful that this process leads to Tennessee focusing on getting out of the bottom 5, if you will, in per pupil spending around public education in the same way that we focused on trying to improve our outcomes and accountability policy. I think it's time that we talk about investment. What I hope to contribute, or what I think I can contribute to this conversation, I've been working in Tennessee since 2010 as a career changer. My background is in banking and finance. I have an engineering degree undergrad, so I think I bring some perspective in terms of understanding the complexities around student-based budgeting. And I also say this, I think having been here for the last decade, I am looking to my next chapter, which probably won't be in Tennessee, but I hope to have a service on this subcommittee be one of the final acts of service that I can give to Tennessee that's been so good to me over the past 11 years and in my career switch from finance into public education.
Thank you. And I apologize before, but I'm going to attempt here. To Tonya?
You did wonderful, actually perfect. So everyone calls me Tony. Yeah, so you can call me Tony. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Shelby County Schools, and I see my old superintendent here, so I have to hats off to Mr. Bo Griffin. I worked as his CFO for a while as well at Millington Municipal Schools. So what I'm looking forward to is really contributing to the development of this funding formula, where we talk a little bit about equity, as all student needs are not the same. So that's one thing I'm looking forward to. And what can I contribute? So Shelby County Schools has had a student-based budgeting formula since 2016. We partner with ERS, so I would love to kind of give you guys some of our lessons learned as we go through this process. So it's a pleasure to meet everyone today, and wonderful job at pronouncing my name, but just call me Tony.
Thank you. Pat Smith.
Good afternoon. I am the current finance director with Oak Ridge Schools. I'll be retiring at the end of the year. So I am looking forward to learning with this group in the short period of time that I have remaining, and look forward to the results. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have Representative Hicks? Is he on the call? How about Senator Jackson? Or Representative Cochran? I am Steve Starnes. I'm the Director of Schools for Greenville City Schools in Northeast Tennessee. This is my third year in this district. Previously had served 4 years as superintendent in Hawkins County Schools. So I've had the experience of being in a county school and a city school as far as working with funding bodies. So that is different, and excited to be a part of this group and to try to come up with a formula that effectively funds the needs in our schools and our school systems for our students. And I guess feel like I have a very good understanding of the BEP and how that works as far as funding and local funding and those type of things. So hopefully I can bring that to the conversation and add value here where I can. So it's good to meet everyone. The next thing on our agenda then, after introductions, are discussions. And
Dr. Starnes, we have in Dyersburg City, we have Ms. Tracy Smith with us as well. And I'm gonna let her introduce herself.
okay.
Hi, I'm Tracy Smith. I'm over the finance here at Dyersburg City Schools. I've been here for 22 years. I'm looking forward to serving and helping in any way I can to get a better funding for our students, especially in rural West Tennessee. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else I overlooked? If you'll advance one more screen, Dr. Fox. Talking about the lens of this committee, what we're focusing on, and so I think we have a wide variety. I think we have urban, rural communities. Is anybody's system considered suburban, you would think? Would you classify yourself that way? All right. And support's needed for our students to be successful, and the needs of all learners. I think that's very important as well. And making sure that we look at a variety of viewpoints, perspectives, and considerations here. So again, kind of that. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to review the slides that were sent. Are there any questions about our process here? Okay. Are there additional materials or resources that will be helpful for you as a committee member? Well, everyone's kind of thinking about that. Kind of some research I've done on my own and found it very interesting, but did a Google search on student weighted funding formulas, and there's actually a student weighted funding formula handbook that started back in 2009 and goes through 2019, but it looks at different school systems that have this model, and actually the 2019 version included Shelby County and Metro Nashville Public Schools, as well as the state of Hawaii. So that might be something you want to look at and just kind of get a idea of what kind of weights or premiums, if you will, that other school systems or states have applied to like a base formula. But I guess thinking about materials, what would be an average cost, or could we get that information, an average cost per student in the BEP today? And that might be a possible starting point, looking at a base cost and then looking at different values from there. All right, while people are thinking about that, I just got a message, and again, while you're thinking, any of our legislators, are they on the call? Representative Hicks, Representative Cochran, or Senator Jackson?
Mr. Starnes, Nakia had placed in the chat, so I was just responding to her asking if they would be, she asked if they would be members or just observers, but we do have them as subcommittee members, so they'll be joining hopefully and weighing in as a member.
Okay, sorry, I didn't want to miss anything there. So are there any other materials or resources you feel like would be helpful for this group?
Well, folks, how did we get to, and this is something, the backstory, who settled on the student-based budgeting? It seems interesting to start an open conversation and say that we've already decided it's going to be student-based budgeting and that we don't want to talk about revising the BEP. So who made that decision? Was that the governor or the commissioner?
I can't speak to that, but I would assume that it was the governor and commissioner that have proposed this.
Dr. Townes, if I may add, and I don't want to be spreading rumors or anything, TOS had a meeting last Wednesday in Murfreesboro, and there were probably 80 superintendents in there. All superintendents got that TOS notification. Steve, you wasn't there though, were you? I didn't.
I had a conflict.
Right. And the commissioner joined us by Zoom, and here's what I heard was that they didn't want to talk about the BEP because it's presently tied up in the lawsuit, and that their only conversation would be about a student-based budgeting plan, that the governor has committed a significant amount of reoccurring funds that he is willing to apply toward this new funding formula. He would hold districts would be held harmless for 1 to 2 years, that you wouldn't get less under the new formula that you're presently getting under the BEP for like 2 years. But he is not for revising the BEP. And if we don't ditch the BEP and go to the student-based funding formula, then those new funds are off the table. And that's what I heard.
So that would be useful to have that. Thank you, Clint. That's helpful. That would be useful to have that in writing. And how much money are we talking about? And can the governor authorize budget without the support of the legislature? Like what bucket of money that he has that doesn't go through approval from the state legislature?
I think is that a rhetorical question?
No, I'm
saying I think we know.
You said the governor has committed, or he has money that he's committed.
That's what was said in that meeting the other day, that he's behind going this direction. He's willing to put more money in it. But if we're talking about revising the BEP, then that money would not be available.
So I think what I'm responding to, and Clint, it's not a question for you. I'm responding to this slide. And so Janice, the other information that we need are these limitations and parameters that the governor has outlined. He should put that in writing. And if there is a bucket of money that he's saying that he can direct himself, he should tell us what that is and how much it is, because I think that's helpful for people being able to lean into this conversation and the restriction around student-based budgeting as opposed to any revision to the BEP. And for the governor, if this is the governor's belief, then it would be helpful to know why it is that the governor is sold on student-based budgeting versus a revision. We probably need that thinking to help inform some of the recommendations and decisions. So it feels like there's more information that could be shared in writing.
All right, thank you.
The other question that came up, and Clint, please correct me if I'm wrong, but this came up at that superintendent's meeting as well. That is this money directed toward public schools, or is this a backdoor way for vouchers? And I think that would be helpful information to have as well from the governor.
Yeah, I don't think that question was ever answered in the superintendent's meeting last week. I think there's a lot of skepticism, that, when they use the word portability and how portable are those funds, if they would be used for a voucher or homeschool or that type of thing. I think that's definitely a question that everybody in the room has.
And I think that's a good one. I'm wondering too, is the governor connecting those two? Because there's lots of places that have student-based, lots of states that do student-based budgeting, and it doesn't have any relationship to the choice conversation or voucher conversation. Is the governor tying the two together? Meaning, if there's
I can speak to that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Hi. No, I can speak to that. We really are focusing on public schools and none of the other connections, just really thinking through. And so pulling back to that earlier statement around moving forward thinking outside of our current BEP, but thinking what might we want in our future thinking for funding for public education. So those are good thoughts to certainly pen, and any resources and more information on the amount of money that would be recurring. But I think that's something that we're hearing for sure is that our conversation is focused on public education and the future of opportunities for students. Yep. So we'll be sure to make note of any other resources that would be helpful to help you inform. And as this committee is thinking through for personnel. Mm-hmm.
Clint touched on this earlier in his introduction, but I guess a couple of questions I've had trying to think through this process is, where does the ability to pay or the local match factor into this formula? And also maintenance of effort, how does that factor in if we change this formula? I think both of those are two critical questions we need to have information for, that if we go to a student-based formula, how does that play across all of our districts? Recently, I think it was 2018, it was actually codified that the ability to pay would be 50% CBER and 50% TASER. And, so that mechanism is there. Will that mechanism continue? And then there'll be a match. Also, I think, as I've read through most of this formula, and to Tony, you may be able to speak to this. When you look at this funding formula, or what I've seen, it almost looks like a site-based management type situation where the principal is, and their staff is a lot more responsible for the amount of money that goes to their school and having more authority. So is there conversation about changing some of the law there, or is this just the way the funding would come from the state to districts, and it would continue to be a funding formula, not a spending plan? Tony, can you speak a little bit about how it works in Shelby County as far as the district putting money out to the schools? Is it still controlled by the district and you allocate certain funds to your schools, or is the school get all the money that allocated to a school and then they determine how they use that money as long as they're compliant with state requirements.
You hit it on the head, Mr. Starnes. It's Mr. Starnes, right? Yep, that is correct. So we get the BEP, and then from there we have a base weight similar to what is on the committee chair presentation. So there's a base weight for all students, and then our board looks each year, and we have a great gentleman that takes all of the weights, what we call the weights. Our board gets this, they vote on it. The academic team has to look at it. So we have here a high mobility population, so that we assign a weight there. We assign a weight to ESL students. And so we look at just our needs and our weights. And then from there, schools, we allocate funding at the point in which, I guess, principals or school leaders, they have to meet a standard where they have X number of teachers for their enrollment. After that is done, which is an SES standard, not our BEP or state standard. Once we have the internal standard met, a school leader then can purchase an additional teacher, a behavior specialist, or whatever they see fit that should be aligned with their school improvement plan. So that's how it works here. So the leader then has to meet the SES standard, but they do have a little level of autonomy for their individual schools. So if it's a chronic absenteeism issue, then they may hire additional staff to address that issue. That's the flexibility there. So hopefully that answers your question, Mr. Starnes.
It does somewhat, I guess, as far as the accountability for the funds or the accounting for the funds. Is that also done at the school level, that they have an allocation, or is that still maintained at the district office? What does that look like?
So it's a little bit of twofold. They have their funds that is in our operating system, but the actual requisition process where they get to purchase supplies, materials, that is done at the school. And so they have flexibility to make decisions at the schools completely based on their operations. But we have our team that's centrally devoted to students, base budgeting. And so they may monitor different things. They get calls from principals to where there's flexibility to move funds around, and we allot that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I do have a question. Can I butt in with my question?
Yes, ma'am.
So I was wondering a little bit about the formula and the process. So first you start with a base weight. Do we as a committee agree to what goes in the base weight to make recommendations before we go to the additional weights that you add on top of it? How does this process look in terms of what this committee then reports out and gives feedback as we progress along? Or do we just come with all recommendations in the end for base, weights, rec funding, and so on and so forth? That's kind of my wondering. How do we progress along as a team throughout this process?
Great question. So you should have received two items, at least. I think the overview, chairman and member overview PowerPoint. So that breaks down a bit of how we will work as a committee to kind of sort through feedback and then ultimately be making recommendations. I'll point us over to slide 55, and I'm just going to kind of layer it on over this one. So for a second. So this larger slide deck, that is a good overview of the process. Here we go. So we're having lots of town hall, Twitter, lots of committee meetings that will be happening over the next few months that have already started, of course, gathering feedback from our stakeholders. They are in writing, also providing that information to tnedu.funding@tn.gov, and I'll stick that in the chat as well. But trying to gather all of the feedback that we can, and as you also solicit feedback and information and getting clarity on the batches of information that will be coming to you, you can send that there. So ultimately, we will be getting feedback from these groups sent to the subcommittees, and then making recommendations that will go to the steering committee, and then ultimately to the General Assembly to make decisions there. So this first batch of information will be coming to you by Monday. November 15th. That will be content gathered straight from each of those outlets soliciting feedback that connect over to school system personnel so that this committee can then go through that, and you'll have a task that one of the next slides will kind of get us into. But really the focus for this committee then is to be thinking about the bulk of feedback that's coming into us from across the state, then also your ability then to solicit feedback within your structures, constituents, stakeholders, to help you even refine, seek clarity, things of that nature as you're honing in on those recommendations based on what you're hearing, what we're getting in the way of feedback. So I hope that helps answer that question for the process. Slide 27 goes into a little more information there. Again, routing, please route as much everything through tnedu.funding. I know you'll be getting lots of feedback, so put it there and we will get it then in those batches so that each group can be reviewing. Does that help?
A little bit.
Can I ask another question just to clarify something that you said? So is the
Yes, ma'am.
purpose of this committee to help develop what goes into the base of that formula?
I think that can be part of our
Yes.
recommendation. I think we have a little bit of latitude here that we would be able to make recommendations, and that would be the recommendations of our committee. But ultimately, all the subcommittees, that information would go to the steering committee. They would formulate a final proposal and legislation, which would then go to the legislature. My understanding of the process. I see Dr. Fox giving me the thumbs up. So, Tony and Kim both, I think we can be very wide open if we want to get down to what do we think the base is, what do we think each of the weights should be, what weights should be applied. I think that's within our purview.
And Steve, if I may add, from the TOSS meeting on Wednesday and the commissioner speaking to us by Zoom, actually she said that one of the key things that we as superintendents should be working on is determining what that student base should be. And then also, what are the weights should be. For example, like ESL would be a weight. Students with disabilities would be a weight. Probably economic disadvantaged. She said that consider a K2 class size weight, having smaller class sizes there. And she said, and Kathy, since we're representing rural schools, that you might want to consider a rural weight as well. So, that's one of the things that I thought I heard her say to superintendents on Wednesday, is that focus of finding out what that baseline weight is, and what the baseline is and what the weights should consist of, was something that superintendents ought to be looking closely at.
Yes.
And then
Oh,
she
I'm sorry.
also said, make the base as large as you possibly can, because then mathematically, then the weights are even larger.
Yes, she did.
I do agree with Nakia in terms of it's hard to even wrap my head around making these recommendations without any idea of how much extra money he's thinking about. And I think that would be really helpful to give us some guiding. When you say we need to make these as large as possible, I'm reminded of the old saying is, when you want a dog, ask for a pony. But is that what we're really doing here? What is realistic? And I think knowing how much money that we're talking about here would help give us some sense of realistic ideas of where to shoot for. That's just my thinking.
Yeah, did any legislators join?
I don't believe so.
Hey, I'm not seeing any yet. I have heard that is a good question, and we'll see if that's a figure we can actually get. But I'm not sure we have that at this time.
Dr.
Can
Fox,
I add on to her? Oh,
yes.
sorry.
Okay. I agree with everyone. I think with the larger the base, we need to advocate for that and then that will help with the multipliers. But one thing that we can't forget, being from where I'm at, I'm a very transient school district, and like for example, I had 5 homeless children move into my school district just last week. I had 4 come from out of state. They've got to be tested for their IEPs, their ED. So how are we going to make sure, if we're going to be on student-based budgeting, how are we going to make sure that those students are taken care of? For an example, once we get our 20-day report, that's what our funding is based upon. And then we have additional students come on with additional needs. How are we going to be able to take care of that if we go with this student-based budgeting? Like I said, being a very transient population, I know in Shelby County, it's very common in the north and the south ends of the county to combat that. But I'm gonna say this again. It's like we're getting to a war of words about public schools, but we don't say public students. If we're going to really be about public schools, we need to be about the public students, because if we just say student, we open that up for a backdoor for a voucher in a heartbeat. And I'm not here trying to be political, but I'm a public school employee, and I work for my stakeholders. And if we're going to just say student, that leaves the door open for a lot of interpretation, which leaves this other money. What is all that money for? Is it for students or is it for public students? I think that's something we need to address.
That's a good note, and we can definitely continue saying it's public school students in these conversations.
I was talking to my board last night about it, and we sort of was throwing around the phrase public funds for public schools.
Hey, Tony, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, I just wanted to add on to Dr. Beck. So when we started student-based budgeting, we had an influx of funds that we were utilizing really from a one-time funding source. Definitely not under my leadership during that time, but I wanted to say we started with a large pool of funds. And so as our funds, dwindled through the years based on declining enrollment, that made it harder. So when I explained to Mr. Starnes that you had that base, principals had all of this extra autonomy to buy different positions, depending on, what the governor allots for an entire allotment, that will allow for some flexibility for school leaders and schools with different needs. But as that pot shrinks or it grows, that will kind of change the way student-based budgeting works. And so I just wanted to add that comment. And then also would love to know about prior year funding. So the way, and I know that this is not current BEP funding, conversation, but, thinking about going forward with the student-based budgeting model, as we think about that base weight, my question would be, is it going to be on prior year EIS data, right? I think it has to be, maybe it does. If it is, then what about the changes that occur between last year's student population data and this year's or your current school year's population data? Because what if you have a high influx of ESL students and you're using last year's data? So those are things that I would love to understand. I know that may be the complexities of the formula, but that will have a drastic impact on different school districts' funding based on the outcomes of this model. So that will be interesting to know.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I have worked in 2 other states and I have never heard of receiving funding based on a prior year's number of students until I got to Tennessee. I find that incredibly challenging, and it seems kind of crazy to me that we are funding this year based on what we had last year, which could be completely different this year. And so I wonder, are there any ways to look at changing that as well? I just think it's a very interesting way to do it, and it presents a lot of problems, I think, for many districts.
think you're on to something right there, with the current funding formula. And this was corrected a few years ago, but prior to that, it was a big issue that the second month right now, we are 12.5%, third month, 17.5%, and then the sixth and seventh month are each 35%. So we get 70% of our funding the second semester when enrollment tends to be lower, but only 30% the first semester. So, I would advocate that if we're going to continue to use certain funding months, at least they're balanced, because we're staffing on the beginning of the year versus the end of the year, which is something I think we need to really consider. Kathy, I'm interested how you would were you using current year numbers and just adjusting the formula as it was going through, or how does that work not using prior year?
You had to do the count based on October 1, and whatever the count was, that was the count. That was what you got for that current year. Another piece I find curious, again, in my other states that I've worked at that I've never heard of until I got here, is having the county commissions be so involved in the school funding, doling out or giving permission to use money. I've never seen that either, and I just wondered. Certainly I understand their role in setting the penny, that type of thing, but in looking at, I can just speak for Cheatham County, the very heavy hand they have over school funding when not many of them have a lot of background information on education. I find that curious as well. Is there any opportunity to look at that? In my states, I've worked in
Tennessee,
Alabama.
I think, is one of only 3 states where school boards don't have taxing authority and can control their own destiny.
Exactly. I moved here from Colorado, and the school board, and in Alabama as well, the school boards are the ones that have that authority, not the county commission.
I think it's 3. That'd be an interesting question to answer, Janice. Can you bring that information to us for the next meeting in terms of if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Dr. Fox, there was a question directed towards you.
Hey, I'm sorry, someone came right in. Can you repeat that?
We were just asking the point around, like, what's the landscape around the states that have where there's taxing authority by the school board versus the county commission being big brother to the school board around funding.
Gotcha. I'll just have to take the question and we'll log that here for today's call. We've got several good questions and resources and things you're thinking about that will help make decisions for this committee. But we'll take that and I can come back. I've got you're also in the chat. So these are good guiding questions to kind of help us hone in on the discussion on what we might need. So I've gone ahead and advanced this to the next slide on our hopes for students to be true. And then I think you've been pulling on several, like what resources are needed to help support students or perspectives that you're representing. So I'll pause us there if there's anything further.
Dr. Fox, if I may add before going to that, when you're talking about the local funding piece, there was 2 days we listened to the commissioner last Wednesday, and then the next day I was on a superintendent engagement group with the commissioner. And one of the things, I'll go back here and look at my notes here, but we asked the question about, and it's admirably, she's talking about equity for all students across Tennessee and trying to level that funding, where a student in Trousdale County has the same opportunity as somebody in Williamson County. Mm-hmm. And so the question started to come up about what would be required of the local funding. And she said, well, right now, we're just talking about the state funding. The local funding conversation will come later. Well, that struck a nerve in the room is because we know that the local funding makes up a great portion of the total funding package. What she said on Wednesday was that there would be a defined floor on what the local government would have to pay and a defined cap on what they would pay. And she left it at that. On Thursday, when asked to explain that and what does that mean, she said this: I am not for a Robin Hood approach. And if someone like Williamson County wants to pay more for education, I do not see why they should be limited. Well, that strikes a nerve with rural districts in the sense that, you know, the state's paying 80% of our BP right now because of the physical capacity piece is, you know, we don't generate any sales tax. I mean, we don't have a Walmart or a Home Depot or even a new car dealership and, you know, or campers or anything. We don't sell any high ticket items. So all of a sudden, if they get the equity piece right on the state, and then it's no holds barred on the local, the equity piece goes out the drain, does it not, Steve?
Well, I don't think you would ever be able to cap what a community is willing to invest in their educational system. I don't think that discussion will fly. I see, like as I said, having been in both type systems, I see the challenges in both.
But I don't see how you're ever going to have equity unless you can level the funding both from state and local. And that's why I'm saying that gets back to the term which one of you was talking about a minute ago is taxing authority. You know, and like Kathy was saying, I've never been in a place like Tennessee. Kathy, welcome to Tennessee. I mean, that's what we've been wrestling with that's what superintendents here wrestle with. But I think I would like to see the taxing authority question come into play. At least it needs to be discussed.
Particularly when the legislature has moved to make school board elections partisan, right? To open up that option. So if that's why they thought, perhaps, I don't know, speculating, that it was better to have the county commission have the taxing authority versus school boards being nonpartisan races, then maybe that relates to this. I put a link into this school funding report that really talks about funding capacity, and it's giving A through F letter grades, and Tennessee is an F overall, FDF, and we are D on equity, and an F on overall funding, and an F on where our funding is versus the GDP indicator of capacity. And that F on the GDP indicator of capacity is where I think a lot of this conversation needs to go, because I think what Clint is pointing out and what you're hearing is that we're just going to fight about redistributing amongst a pie that's already too small. It just can't work. People aren't going to get behind this. And I think his point is well made about the capacity kicker inside of the current BP, which you could handle through a student-based budgeting formula by flagging for small districts, for rural districts. Those are all proxies, right, for funding capacity, I think, in some ways. And we could study the relationship between that. But our bigger issue is that Tennessee could be putting more money into public education funding, and should be when you look at what is happening versus other states. So that's why, I mean, I just feel like if we're going to have a conversation, I appreciate the department trying to structure a conversation, but let's get to the conversation.
I guess, is there a state out there that Tennessee is trying to model their funding formula after? I mean, are they trying to model it after an Indiana or I don't know what state it might be, But
No, I think this, well, in our conversation is really what are our needs, thinking through needs for our students, for public school students, thinking kind of outside the parameters of our current BEP to really hone in on what you would, it leads us to our next slide, what you feel you must have, like what equitably and what opportunities do we want to provide for our students, what must we have, what should we have, and what's nice to have. You'll be receiving information, so thinking through our next steps, we'll be getting those batches of feedback that have been collected across all the open venues. We'll continue to have more of those through Twitter, and the things you've surfaced here are granular and they're important, and they help you create your field of vision to support a new vision in public education in Tennessee. So you'll be receiving a batch of feedback, our first of many, and your task is to please review that, go through, sort them into the must-haves, what feels critical, thinking through what we should have, and then what's nice to have, and then maybe an other. Then at the bottom on that guiding question, I'd like to pause just a second there to think through let's talk about what over the next week or so, how does the subcommittee want to solicit feedback that would help you in answering some questions? I've heard several. We have those pinned, and we will come back with information that we can and provide some insights there. But then as you're pulling in the bulk of the feedback, and then you are sorting, and you want to solicit that out to other constituents that can help you weigh in, what ways might you want to do that? What would you need to help solicit feedback from others? I'll pause there for you to chew on that a second. We have 3 minutes, Chairman.
Well, I think that another thing, we probably are still experiencing some fluctuation in our enrollment. I would advocate or go on record as using our 2019 figures as our baseline, if we're going to have a baseline going back to 2019 till we can fully stabilize and recover from decline in enrollment. Some people may be back this year, but I think there's still some fluctuation there. So I think that's important. I think that there's nothing been mentioned very much about school security, and most of us, I think it's very important to have a SRO in our schools. So I think that needs to factor into this formula, taking our nurses and our counselors and those type ratios and getting those closer to national averages are all important things. But any last thoughts before we wrap up today?
Has any consideration been brought up at the TOS meetings or with the governor or the commissioner regarding regional cost of living increases, Nashville and the surrounding counties versus Chattanooga and the surrounding counties? Has that been included in the conversation when you're looking at the new funding approach? Dr. Satterfield, I can't hear you.
That's a good thought. I've just captured it. So seeing that we have 1 minute, Chairman, we've got our next meeting here. I did want to surface that you may in our next meeting think about a vice chair. I know the dates that are coming ahead, just to ensure that you all have someone in case Director Starnes is not able to be there that day. I know your lives are busy, but I hope each of you will be able to join each time. Our next meeting is next week, the 17th. I'll pause and let you take anything there, Director Starnes.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Fox. Again, we'll start off our meeting as one of our first things next week, electing a vice chair. I hope to get to that today, but time slipped away. So. But again, thank you all. Hope you all have a great rest of the week and look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday.
Thank you. Thank you.